culture of naturalizing classifications, naturalization of classification. You have that in the paper. We distribute populations according to natural differences. So domination is not a cause, but rather a consequence of the hierarchy. They are dominated because they are inferior. Racial and sexual, of course, have been the two main forms of naturalizing these differentiations. And they have been very prevalent. And therefore, the absence is why I consider these people on this line are the inferior. Then we have a monoculture. The fourth monoculture is the monoculture of the dominant scale. And in Western modernity, we have two scales, the universal, dominant scale, the universal, and recently the global. What is the universal? It is the characteristic of an entity whose validity does not depend on context. It is valid irrespective of context. And therefore is prevalent because, of course, has priority over any other condition or entity that is local or particular. So on this side, whatever is not universal is local or particular, or is particular. Sometimes peculiar also. And what is the global? The global is the characteristic of an entity, usually a local entity, that manages to expand its ambit to the globe, and by doing so, develops a right to call rival conditions as local. You globalize fast food. The traditional Portuguese or Spanish or Italian food becomes ethnicized. You universalize the Hollywood style of filmmaking. The French movies become ethnic. There was a time in which Alain Delon, Marcel Mastroianni, Brigitte Bardot would be the symbols of universal acting. Now they are ethnic actors. Whatever becomes global, make a rival hypothesis, a rival entity local. That's why the globalization of English is localizing French or German. There is no globalization without localization. So here is the local. A diminished type of reality. Then finally, the monoculture of productivity. What means to be productive? It's applied to men and women and to nature. Is how much output you get for a production cycle. There were many other conceptions of productivity going on in the world up until recently. For instance, in land, for the peasants' economies, for instance, Israel today, the productivity of a piece of land cannot be determined in a production cycle. It has to be determined across several production cycles. Because the land, if it is used one here, it has to rest for another year in order to rest, because the land needs rest as we need rest, and then comes again. But then at the end of the 19th century we developed the fertilizers, and all of a sudden production and productivity of nature is not determined by a series of cycles, but just by a production cycle. How much output by an acre by a production cycle. This applies to men and women, as laborers, as workers, and of course as nature. So whatever falls outside this monoculture is considered lazy, unproductive, sterile. So here you have 5 ways of producing essences, of diminishing, of transforming something into a kind of irreversible, diminished, truncated, irrelevant reality. As ignorant, as residual, as inferior, as local, as particular, and as productive. So we are very pluralistic in our ways of producing essences. So this is the sociology of essences. So without this line, it's impossible to retrieve these realities. And therefore, if you want to go to a positive self-thinking, we have to replace monocultures by ecologies. And we have in my paper the 5 corresponding ecologies, how we develop ecologies. These ecologies are ecologies of knowledge, of temporalities, and so on. I'll speak tomorrow more about ecologies of knowledge, but there are 5 ecologies there, right? And what is important here is that, for instance, in Leonard's time, if you look at the way in which Western modernity becomes so obvious and so insidious, because it's so evident for all of us, is that these conceptions of linear time made a complete gap, a fracture between simultaneity and contemporaneity. And we didn't notice that. That is to say, encounters may be simultaneous, but these encounters are among non-contemporaneous people. When a CEO of the World Bank meets a peasant in Africa, the encounter is simultaneous, but it's not between 2 contemporary people. They are not contemporaneous, because one is residual, obsolete, and one is developed. So simultaneity doesn't go together with contemporaneity, because we don't allow different ways of being contemporary. And we'll see tomorrow how I develop different ways of being contemporary. Like indigenous people. They're not traditional. They have different ways of belonging to the contemporaneity. There are different ways of being contemporary. So we have to undergo in all these areas, the movement from monoculture to ecology. And here, if we develop, and we're going to develop more of this ecology of knowledge, even though here you find, now if you go to the books of Bertel, you'll see that the first book is Democratizing Democracy. All of them, the books are organized according to the ecologies. For instance, another production is possible. It is exactly about this ecology of productivity. Another knowledge is possible. It's precisely about the ecologies of knowledge. Democratizing democracy is against, it is not here in this form, but it covers other ways in which you can, in fact, develop new forms of going beyond the democracy. That I'll come in the last class, democracy that has been prevalent here, to other kinds of democracy that has been existing in this side, but has not been acknowledged as such. What we call, as I'll be calling at the end, the intercultural democracy. So I think that in this case, we have, if we go from here, we'll see how now, since I have a little bit more 5 minutes, I'm hesitating, as you can see, because if I start my conversation, I don't know if you want to ask some questions, because if you want, we have 7 minutes, I think, or 10 minutes, we do that, and I'll move on to the ecologists next time. It's up to you.